Standing outside Flying J on Route 30 near Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, I watched as my wife's blue Chevy Traverse vanished around a bend with the tail lights, having departed with a laugh after purchasing unwanted $4.79 worth of coffee. The chilly November wind, characteristic of Pennsylvania, offered its judgmental gusts. The gas station glowed orange and white against the dark highway, while 18-wheelers growled at distant diesel pumps. A woman walked by with her children, oblivious to their surroundings, immersed in their own worlds. I was no exception, engrossed in my own thoughts. She'd been irritable throughout our drive from Philadelphia. Our journey was punctuated only by occasional terse remarks about the incorrect packing of suitcases, taking the wrong exits on the turnpike, and a general tendency to complicate matters unnecessarily. We were traveling to spend Thanksgiving with her parents in Hagerstown, Maryland. In just 4 days, I was eagerly anticipating our departure. It wasn't due to any dislike for her parents. Her father, a jovial, big-hearted man, was one of my favorite people. He always told the same 3 jokes at every gathering and still managed to elicit applause each time. However, Thanksgiving in Hagerstown had transformed into 4 days of feeling like Diane's husband in her hometown, a change from its former meaning as a gathering of family, warmth, and shared history, symbolized by a house where the same food was prepared on the same day for 30 years running. Now it felt more like being scrutinized and found wanting in subtleties too elusive to articulate yet impossible to ignore. I requested a stop so I could use the restroom. She pulled into Flying J off the highway without uttering a word, which was better than the last 90 minutes of sharp remarks. I informed her I'd be brief. She agreed. I went indoors. I estimate I was away for about 6 minutes. I know this because I glanced at my watch twice, once before entering and once exiting, due to years of being mindful of time thanks to Diane. Upon stepping out into the parking lot, the spot where our car had been was vacant. I assumed she'd driven around. Perhaps she needed gas. Maybe she parked on the other side of the pumps. I walked the entire length of the building, checking both rows of pumps. There was nothing. I went to the end of the lot, nothing. I stood where our Traverse had been parked and slowly rotated, searching for our car or any vehicle that resembled ours. And there was nothing. I called her phone. She answered on the second ring, laughing so much she could barely speak. She mentioned she'd observe how long it would take him to return home, then ended the call. I remained, phone in grip, facing the wind blowing from the ridge and the surreal glow of Flying J casting over everything. I stood still, waiting for the emotion expected, perhaps anger or alarm. Instead, a tranquil calm settled within me, as if something patiently waiting had found its reason to cease its patience. My name is Curtis Aldridge, aged 46. Born and raised in Allentown, Pennsylvania, I'm the second of 3 children from a family where my father worked at a wire products plant for 28 years on the night shift. My mother taught 3rd grade, and we learned to deal with issues without unnecessary fuss. There were no family meetings dedicated to discussing feelings. In evenings, discussions revolved around the Eagles and whether our neighbors neglected their gutters once more. Our father, always present, dependable, bordering on steadfast persistence, held the conviction that a man's value lay in being trusted by those around him. I internalized this deeply, shaping my actions around it. I became synonymous with reliability, constancy, the man upon whom others could rely. I constructed a career in structural engineering based on this instinct. The desire to uphold things, to foresee weaknesses before they escalate into disasters, to shoulder burdens without drawing attention to myself. On that Tuesday in November, at 46 years old, standing in a Flying J parking lot as tail lights faded, I was a structural engineer who had spent the previous 5 years gradually realizing, piece by piece, that I had constructed an identical, steady, reliable, selfless structure around a marriage that no longer warranted it. For 5 years, understanding hadn't prompted any action from me. Instead, I kept comprehending, carrying on, and convincing myself that things would balance out. There are countless instances I could recount from those years. I could narrate the event of the dinner party where she interrupted my speech 3 times within 4 minutes to clarify statements made to our friends, until I stopped mid-sentence and let her finish because it was less draining. I could also share the story of March's Saturday when I spent 7 hours repairing the deck as it was hazardous, not due to any request, but because I perceived its unsafe state, and that's what one does. Upon returning home, she looked at the deck and merely stated, "You painted it the incorrect color. I told you I wanted the gray one." In reality, I hadn't painted it the wrong color. She had indicated the sample I used was fine. I found the text. I opted not to present it to her. In those 5 years, I could recount my encounter with the word pathetic, echoing in the kitchen following an argument about finances half a year past, and how it seeped into me as I had taken in countless other words, a testament to our marriage dynamics, you speaking, me listening. Yet the crux of those years lies here. I stayed, remained silent, never raised my voice, never expressed disapproval or demanded change. Instead, I persisted, consistent and dependable, accepting and adapting, believing in eventual equilibrium. One day in a parking lot, something compelled me to utter no more. Standing there for half a minute, I made up my mind. Upon returning indoors, I asked the cashier about lodging nearby. There was a motel, the Keystone Motor Lodge, 0.4 miles along Route 30 as per a homemade sign behind the counter. $48 a night. I was informed by the cashier that the place was clean, a remark used to differentiate it from unclean ones. I traversed 0.4 miles under the cover of darkness, carrying my work bag, a constant companion on my travels, filled with clothes for 3 days, my laptop, a phone charger, and approximately $45 in cash. Upon checking in, I received a key and proceeded to the room. The comforter seemed to have aged several decades. The television offered only 11 channels. A heating unit under the window emitted a sound, as if it resented the cold outside and was striving to compensate. I sat on the bed's edge, contemplating my life for the first time in years. Not just the scheduled self-analysis during commutes, but the realities, the feel, the daily experience of living it. What I unveiled wasn't an entity that could be fully gazed upon at once. It was fragmented. It reminded me of how one handles bright objects, glancing away then back, gradually acclimating to the intensity of its illumination. I had a dwelling I'd nurtured for 12 years, a business where I offered 2 decades of diligent, unspectacular skill, a child whom I adored beyond what I thought was possible to love another human. A relationship that metamorphosed into a theatrical depiction of marriage, where I enacted the dependable spouse, and Diane played the intriguing wife, all while we feigned this arrangement as a natural progression rather than something we slipped into unwittingly. I spent considerable time on that motel bed. Then I dialed the phone. If this narrative resonates with your reality, if you identify with a moment where one continues to absorb, adapt, and hope for equilibrium, I urge you to subscribe to this channel instantly. Share your experience below regarding a time when you were overburdened and the actions you took to cope. Give this video a thumbs up if it resonates with you. It significantly assists in guiding more individuals towards tales that remind them they aren't alone during their challenges. Stay tuned, as this story is about to unfold further. The initial call I made that night was to Nathan, my 12-year-old son. He was at Lansdowne with his Aunt Patricia watching him while we traveled to Hagerstown. He should have been asleep. However, he answered even before the second ring ended, indicating he had been waiting. Dad, he didn't ask or greet. He simply said my name in a way that showed his concern for me, a habit he developed around age 10 and which I tried, with limited success, not to dwell on. Hi there, mate. I'm fine. Mom said you were having car trouble. That was what she told him, car trouble. I took a moment to process this information. I'll be gone for a short spell, no cause for concern, I mentioned. For how long? I remained undetermined about that. There was a contemplative quietness, similar to the one Nathan often exhibited when pondering instead of reacting. This thoughtful silence had been part of him since he was 4, and it was a trait he'd inherited from me, serving as both a source of pride and a subtle burden because I'd had ample time lately to ponder what other lessons he might be absorbing. Lessons about the actions of a man when his spouse behaves in a certain manner. Nathan eventually spoke up, Dad. Yes, was my reply. Everything all right between you and Mom? Nathan, at 12 years old, had been observing us for 12 years. Children often sense before adults do. They can decipher the emotional climate of a household as sailors read the sky. Though they might not have the words to express it, they understand. We're addressing some issues, I replied cautiously. Understood. A brief pause followed. I love you, Dad, Nathan said. I love you too, was my response. Tomorrow morning I will phone you before school, agreed? Agreed. Following our call, I remained seated for a prolonged period in the tranquil solitude of that motel room. Afterward, I powered up my laptop, not for work nor immediate tasks, but to engage in an activity I should have initiated much earlier. I composed a list, not a task list, not a strategy, merely the facts. expressed openly, as I discovered over time that reality is sometimes more bearable when it's externalized rather than internalized. When it assumes the form of words on a screen, incapable of self-defense or softening or requesting insignificance. Matters that had become routine in the preceding 5 years, I enumerated them. After an hour, I had amassed numerous pages that collectively depicted a man who had been, albeit subtly and diligently with pure intentions, gradually dissolved. Not at the hands of one seeking erasure. That's crucial. I aim to recount the events not as a simplistic portrayal of Diane as a villain, for that is not the truth. The truth was subtler and more poignant than that. It was a tale of two individuals who, at one point in their lives, were perfectly suited, yet over time, transformed into mismatches. Instead of confronting this reality, acknowledging it, or addressing it honestly through repair or termination, we both withdrew into the roles our marriage had designated for us. Diane evolved into someone more assertive, critical, and controlling. I became increasingly passive, accommodating, and unseen. Neither of us ever identified it by its name until a gas station in Chambersburg did. Before breakfast that following morning, I accomplished 3 tasks. Firstly, I contacted my senior partner at the firm to request emergency leave, perhaps for a week or 2. He stated, "Take whatever you require." With 12 years of consistent reliability behind me, this wasn't a discussion needing negotiation. I contacted my bank to establish a separate checking account with the cash in my wallet and the savings I'd saved since my 30s, a practice instilled by my father. Always maintain something that's yours alone, son, not concealing money but having an insurance. I didn't fully grasp his meaning until that moment. I also arranged for a car rental from a company near Flying J, unaware of its existence until the clerk mentioned it during check in the previous night. A 9-year-old Ford Focus in a somber hue greeted me. It bore the scent of pine air freshener and another's journey. It was ideal. Heading north on I-81, I pondered my destination. Eventually, I found myself in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. This might sound arbitrary, but it held a certain degree of randomness. Driven through Bloomsburg long ago, en route to a site visit, I recalled it vividly. It seemed to fit like a puzzle piece, exuding an authentic charm that resonated. It boasted a downtown with functioning stores, a university, ancient brick structures, and the Susquehanna River meandering along its periphery. It had an air of tranquility where one could be inconspicuously secluded. I craved this serenity. For the first couple of nights, I secured lodging at a modest inn. On my second day, I discovered a short-term rental on Center Street, a 1-bedroom apartment perched above a hardware store, priced affordably at $450 monthly, with flexibility for a month-to-month lease. The landlord, Gerald Booth, a reserved man in his 60s, provided the keys with the perfect blend of indifference. I arranged my laptop on the diminutive kitchen table and successfully established the firm's VPN connection. I phoned my supervisor, Douglas Merritt, a compassionate individual who had experienced a tough divorce 4 years prior, to explain my predicament. I was grappling with a personal family issue that required me to work from home temporarily. He instructed me to maintain the Harrisburg project's schedule. I assured him I would. True to my word, Deanne began contacting me from Tuesday evening, several hours post my departure from Flying J. I won't feign ignorance about the phone calls. I looked each time it rang. However, I chose not to answer. The messages I read. Initially, they were aggressive. "Where are you? Return my call. This is preposterous." Later, they transformed into a category that was more ambiguous. "We need to discuss this." "You can't vanish." Then on the 4th day, one struck me hard. "Your son needs you at home." I had contacted Nathan daily at times twice. Diane was aware of this fact. She learned from her knowledge of Nathan informing her, as well as a text she received from me, which was my only communication during the initial fortnight, stating, "I will contact Nathan daily. He must not be involved in this predicament. Please avoid putting him there." Employing Nathan as a means to try to lure me back was an exceptionally desperate move, and realizing this gave me crucial insight into our situation. Instead of replying to her, I opted to call Nathan. "She said you made the choice to depart from us," he told me around the 10th day. His voice conveyed caution as he spoke. He bore a burden that wasn't his own. This angered me deeply. "That isn't accurate," I responded softly. "The entire truth is complex, and I will share it with you when I can discuss it face to face. However, I want you to know this at the moment. I didn't abandon you. I will never abandon you. I am just a few hours away, and I will continue calling daily, and this won't change. Do you comprehend this? There was a pause. Yes, I agree. Nathan, do you grasp what I'm saying? Or would you prefer more explanation? A longer pause followed, one that suggested he was contemplating deeply. I get it, he replied at last. I just wanted to hear you confirm it. I'll continue repeating it as long as needed. We spoke for 2 hours that evening. He discussed his history project, focusing on the French and Indian War, a topic that truly piqued his interest, specifically the challenges of supplying armies over mountainous terrain, which I suspected stemmed from his engineering inclination, a thought that pleased me. He also talked about a fellow student in his gym class named Devin, who had tricked their teacher into thinking being struck by a volleyball qualified as a sports injury, and about how his Aunt Patricia was serving the same 3 meals in rotation because she lacked culinary skills. I scheduled a grocery delivery to their home for the next day, filled with food he enjoyed. I bought him a gift card to a local pizzeria near his school. Although they were trivial acts, I intended to perform them. Allow me to describe the sensation of those months, as I believe the overall experience surpasses merely recounting the events. Bloomsburg in winter transforms into a unique realm. The Susquehanna River sinks and turns gray and sluggish. During the holidays, the university is deserted, making the town even more tranquil. All I had were an affordable apartment, rewarding work, and no other obligations. For the initial 3 weeks, the absence of everything else was the most challenging part. I wasn't someone with hobbies. Rather, my life revolved around work, Nathan, and household maintenance, which consumed every spare moment for years. Devoid of all that, only left with work and a 3-hour daily window when Nathan was in school and no scheduled engagements, I found myself at a loss as to how to occupy my time. I began walking. Each morning prior to using the laptop, I strolled along. In the initial week, I discovered a trail by the river, a 1.5-mile gravel path twisting beneath barren trees, bordering the bank before looping through a small park en route to Center Street. At 6 every day, I traversed this path. Initially, I walked for the sake of engaging my body. Later, I did so as I noticed that my mind became clearer afterwards than it was previously. The river was useful for contemplation. Although not picturesque in November, Pennsylvania landscapes are notably stark and honest during that season. It is simply water flowing, dark, and persistent, not overly concerned with human issues, just performing its duty. I pondered my marriage on those walks, not with the overwhelming guilt I anticipated, nor with anger, but surprisingly with a detached perspective, as if evaluating a project that didn't turn out as planned. Examining the source of the flaw, the initial presumption that had led to all subsequent mistakes, what I consistently found myself confronting was this. The relationship dynamic between Diane and me wasn't solely her imposition. It was a mutual creation. She became increasingly controlling and critical, yet so did I, becoming more passive and accommodating. My passivity wasn't just a reaction to her behavior, but a series of choices I repeatedly made because it felt simpler in the short term than the other option. The other option being, stand up for myself, express disapproval, establish boundaries. Each time I failed to set those boundaries, I sent her a signal that there were no boundaries to set, and she responded accordingly. This isn't an excuse for her, but rather, it's the reality of how such situations unfold. 2 individuals, 2 sets of choices, 1 destructive dynamic that harmed us both gradually. I spent considerable time contemplating this on the river path. I also sought help from a therapist. I'd been mulling it over for weeks. The concept evoked a vague, disquiet reminiscent of unease experienced by certain men of specific generations and dispositions. The feeling that discussing personal feelings with a professional is only resorted to when self-management proves insufficient. Neither my father nor his father had ever consulted a therapist. I was, however, the one seated in a small apartment in Bloomsburg, gazing at a river daily, wrestling with the question of how I arrived here, and perhaps self-reliance had its boundaries. I discovered Dr. Preston where via search engines. His office was located above an insurance agency on Market Street, equipped with a white noise machine in the hallway outside his door that exceeded the necessary decibel level. In his mid-50s, he possessed an uncommon stillness characteristic of skilled therapists. This wasn't passivity or absence. Instead, it was a genuine presence that most people lack. In our initial meeting, he spent the initial 20 minutes inquiring about various topics without offering any personal views on my responses. I recounted tales of the gas station, events prior to 5 years ago, and the list I had scribbled on the motel room bed. Upon hearing me out, he posed, "What is it that you desire?" Instead of presenting the polished, deliberate response I had crafted for this encounter, I expressed my intention to discuss matters related to clarity, integrity, and decision-making for Nathan. He halted me with a raised hand. "Not what you believe you ought to want, but what do you truly yearn for?" This distinction left me momentarily at a loss for words. After pondering the genuine question for a while, I admitted, "I long to feel significant, to awaken each day feeling it belongs to me. I wish to cease feeling as if I'm simply maintaining things to prevent their deterioration rather than working on aspects that would enhance them." Upon reflecting on my statement, I remained silent. For a considerable period, I haven't experienced those emotions. I can't pinpoint exactly when I stopped feeling them. Dr. Ware nodded thoughtfully. "That's an open statement," he replied. "That's where we begin." I made weekly visits. The legal proceedings initiated in February. I came across Rachel Acaffer through a professional acquaintance from Philadelphia who had undergone divorce 3 years ago and spoke of her with the reverence usually reserved for exceptional medical practitioners. She operated an office in Bloomsburg, which took me by surprise as I anticipated needing to commute to a larger city. On a Tuesday morning, she greeted me with the tranquil, meticulous care that instilled trust in me almost instantly. I shared everything with her: the gas station incident, my past; the dynamics of the marriage, Nathan's circumstances. In her office, she attentively listened without interjecting, posed 12 precise questions later, succinctly described the legal process, outlined its timeline, clarified the child custody guidelines for a 13-year-old in Pennsylvania, and suggested potential temporary arrangements during the proceedings. Leaving her office 2 hours later, I experienced, for the first time since November, a sense of direction. Diane obtained the initial documents in early March. I didn't respond to the call, as Rachel had advised against it, and I complied. She would handle the lawyers moving forward, but I answered Nathan when he called that evening. "Mom's very upset," he said. By then, he was 13 years old, and we had celebrated his birthday over 2 phone conversations and a card sent from Bloomsburg. "She's been crying. She claims you're ruining everything." I felt the sharp pang of that statement resonate deeply. There is no divorce scenario where a father doesn't feel the impact of those words from his child. None at all. "What do you think?" I asked, following a lengthy pause. Nathan's long pauses typically signified deep contemplation, not merely gathering thoughts. "I believe things were already damaged before any of this," he replied cautiously. "I guess I just didn't know how to express that earlier." 12 years old. "You're correct," I told him. "Things were broken prior to all of this. I apologize for making you bear the burden of that knowledge alone for so long." A pause ensued. "It could be lonely at times," he said, "but I assumed you would eventually understand." I managed a chuckle, given the circumstances. "That's quite a lot of trust in me." "You are intelligent," he said, "just sometimes slow." Spring arrived gradually in Bloomsburg. I had been there for 5 months. The river refilled again. The path transitioned from frosty gray to the early thaw's mud, then to the brief tentative green before everything bloomed fully. A quaint coffee shop on Iron Street, run by Beverly, was my favorite spot, where she memorized my order after just 3 visits and conversed only when I initiated it. I followed a familiar routine. Gerald, my landlord, occasionally popped by to discuss structural queries regarding the aged building due to his cautiousness about old properties. Douglas contacted me every Thursday, a regular call during which we discussed projects and delved into the mysterious realms of being middle-aged men uncertain about their paths. I had established a life. It was tranquil, odd, and still tender at the edges, yet it felt uniquely mine for perhaps the first time in years, even decades. In April, Nathan arrived as per the temporary custody arrangement. He boarded the bus from Philadelphia and alighted at Iron Street Station, where I awaited him. Upon spotting me, he remained silent, instead walking towards me to embrace me. After a brief hug, he examined my face closely, much like he scrutinized everything since his childhood. "You seem different," he commented as we disengaged. "Is it good or bad change?" he probed further. I noticed him analyzing me with that peculiar intensity he's had since he was young. "It's a good change," I replied. "You can see the exhaustion from before has vanished." We spent the weekend engaging in unremarkable activities. We strolled along the river trail. I introduced him to Beverly's Cafe, and we watched a game on my laptop from the small couch, our elbows touching. He inquired about the projects I was engaged in: a bridge restoration in Harrisburg, a commercial development in Reading, and expressed genuine curiosity regarding my responses. On Sunday evening, before driving him to the bus station, he sat at my kitchen table with a glass of orange juice and looked at me. "Dad, can I ask you something?" I replied. "Ask away." "Are you going to be all right?" I responded. "Yes, I am, and you?" He pondered for a moment, as he always did, sincerely. "I believe so. Mom's still quite angry, but Grandpa phones her every night and Aunt Pam visits regularly. I think they're assisting." "That's positive. She claims you destroyed everything," he stated, watching my expression closely. I remained silent. "I don't agree with that," Nathan said. "I believe things were already broken and no one was acknowledging it, and now at least we're being honest about it." He was 13 years old, and I found myself speechless in that moment. I still struggle to find the right words for that instance. "You're remarkable," he commented, rolling his eyes but smiling. The mediation spanned 4 sessions throughout June and July. Diane and I faced each other at a conference table, Gerald Hoskins, a distinct individual from my landlord, acting as mediator. I recognized the coincidence but chose not to mention it. We began dissecting our mutual life, determining who would retain which possessions. Diane was unlike what I had anticipated. She was subdued, composed. The vibrant, forceful energy she previously exuded had diminished significantly. I found myself puzzled by this transformation. I examined the situation repeatedly, attempting to discern truth from facade, but ultimately gave up because it didn't affect the practical tasks at hand. During the third meeting, Diane made a straightforward remark unrelated to assets or custody. In his brief absence, it was merely Diane and myself, along with our legal representatives, when she softly remarked, "I hadn't anticipated you would depart." I turned my gaze to her and replied, "Yes, I know." This brief exchange stayed with me for weeks, causing much contemplation. I pondered over the implications that she had assumed I wouldn't leave, constructing our relationship based on this presumption, using every sharp comment, correction, and demeaning label like pathetic, predictable, or mediocre, as evidence that I would endure it and return. But what took the longest to realize was that she didn't hold me in contempt. The misconception about my resilience had been erroneous, and by the time we uncovered this error, we were on opposite sides of a conference table with lawyers present. The mathematics of a failing marriage seldom are straightforward. It's almost never entirely one person's fault, regardless of how much the narrative suggests otherwise. The divorce was finalized in September, and I moved back closer to Philadelphia in October, settling in an apartment in Ardmore, approximately 6 miles from the house in Lansdowne where Nathan resided with Diane. This proximity allowed for a 12-minute drive. Yet the distance provided me with my own space, mornings, and a personal Riverwalk-like experience. In Ardmore, there's a running path along a creek behind the complex, perfect for contemplation. In October, my firm presented me with a senior partnership track opportunity, which I accepted. My productivity over the past 11 months surpassed any quantifiable standards set by the previous 5 years, a fact acknowledged by Douglas in a subtly phrased manner during my review, demonstrating his comprehension and discretion. I valued this understanding. On the initial Thursday of November, 11 months nearly to the hour after my stopover at Flying J on Route 30, I returned home from a morning stroll to discover 20 unreturned calls on my phone. 17 were from Diane, 2 from her sister Pam, 1 unexpectedly from Lorraine in Pittsburgh, a call I hadn't received in 6 weeks and who usually contacts me only when she has urgent news. Nathan was absent among the 20 calls. My initial action was to verify his status before even reading the numbers clearly. He wasn't there. I headed for the kitchen, brewed coffee, and phoned Lorraine. Before the second ring ended, she answered. "I'm sorry to disturb you unexpectedly, Curtis," Lorraine began. "Diane has been trying to contact you since early this morning. She rang me as she didn't know what else to do. Something has occurred." A brief pause followed. Lorraine rarely pauses. She sounded like she needed to discuss something serious with you personally, not about legal matters. "Is Nathan all right?" "Nathan, it seems, is at school." "This isn't concerning him. I believe it's regarding her." I acknowledged her and ended the call. I contacted Pam. "Thank goodness you called back," Pam stated as if she'd been dealing with an emergency for 3 hours. "Curtis, you don't owe her anything. I understand that. Yet Diane had a tough night and she's been trying to reach you since 6 a.m. I think she needs to hear your voice." "What transpired?" A brief pause. "I believe she wants to convey it herself. Do you suppose she would answer if she calls again?" I stood in my kitchen, gazing out the window at the creek, the November light filtering through the trees, the water flowing slowly and determinedly. Tell her to call me, I said. She's been trying to reach you for 3 hours. Tell her to call me one more time. I'll take the call. I placed the phone on the counter. Paused. 40 seconds later it rang. Diane's voice sounded like something I hadn't heard in years, not the act of a voice. Instead of the composed, commanding tone I'd grown accustomed to from Diane for a long time, it was her uncertain, unguarded voice that reached me this time. She began with, "I don't know why I'm calling you," she said. I assured her she could call me whenever she wanted. "What's going on?" I asked. "I need to tell you something." There was a pause. "I know it doesn't change anything," she added. "I'm not asking for anything." But she needed to confide in me, not her therapist or sister, me. She sat down at the kitchen table before speaking. "Okay," I said, "tell me." What followed was a 40-minute, disjointed account that didn't follow a logical sequence. It was as if she were piecing together fragments of a story that had to be constantly revisited and explained in context. Far from a prepared speech, it was the raw, unfiltered expression of someone who had stopped worrying about how they sounded. Here is the gist of her words. In February, 2 weeks after she received the divorce papers, she started seeing a therapist named Dr. Sylvia Morrow. The story began there. In Diane's own words, she found you relentlessly insightful, a term Diane used for individuals whose insights made her uncomfortable yet prompted respect. Over the course of their weekly sessions, they delved into various issues. Unbeknownst to me before, Diane's mother, whom I had always admired for her warmth and generosity, was also exacting and critical, traits Diane had internalized unconsciously. Her mother emphasized competence while penalizing any sign of weakness. This upbringing molded Diane to consistently display competence, excel in every setting, correct and clarify, and lead, as not doing so felt like vanishing on a deep level. This was how she treated me. The word she used, pathetic, doctor. Morrow inquired about it particularly after Diane casually brought it up, asking where she'd learned it used that way, concerning a person, what it signified, what she'd been apprehensive about when saying it to you in the kitchen 6 months before the gas station incident. They had delved into this term over 3 sessions. Then last night, her father, the jovial, amiable man with his 30-year-old jokes, suffered a heart attack and was admitted to Hagerstown Hospital. The doctors were optimistic about his recovery, but he was in the ICU and nothing was definite yet. Diane had driven alone down there and waited in the waiting room throughout the night, contemplating. "I sat there," she said, "and I found myself reaching for my phone to call you, not to ask for help, just because that's who I contacted when things were tough." A moment of silence followed. Then it struck me that I was the one preventing myself from acting like that anymore. I remained quiet, allowing the thought to linger. "I've been reflecting on my actions," she admitted. "It wasn't only about the gas station incident. You understand I'm not just referring to the gas station, correct? I meant the years of it, the way I treated you, the way She paused and began again. "I believed I was maintaining your position. I didn't realize that was what I was doing." Not in those words, but that was essentially it. Maintaining the position I decided you should occupy. "And you allowed me to," she said. "But then you stopped allowing me." She went quiet again. "And when you did, I didn't know how to react. I still don't fully understand. But now I comprehend what I was doing and the cost it imposed on you and our relationship. And I needed you to listen to me confess that, even if it doesn't alter anything." After she finished speaking, I stayed seated at my kitchen table for a long while. A complex emotion surged within me. It was deep-seated grief, old and lingering. It was the release of tension so long built up that I had ceased to acknowledge its presence. Beneath this, there was something not quite forgiveness, but close to it. A realization that the woman who departed a gas station in laughter was not synonymous with Diane's entire identity. Similarly, the man who endured years of corrections without retaliation was not my whole self. People should not be defined by their worst moments, nor reduced to something simple. After a moment I shared, "I hope your father makes a full recovery." It was sincere. "Take care," I added. "Earlier, when he was more lucid, he inquired about you. He told Mom to convey that he's always believed you were a good man." This struck an unexpected chord within me. "Tell him I send my greetings," I replied. "Inform him that he should attend Nathan's 8th grade graduation." A nearly audible chuckle. "I will relay the message." A pause. "Curtis," she stated, "I apologize for everything. I'm being honest because I should have been honest a long time ago, and you deserve to hear it from me directly." I had waited 11 months for those words, unaware that I was waiting. I thought it would feel like a snap, like a perfectly fitted puzzle piece, like an unresolved issue suddenly resolving. Instead, it felt like a prolonged sigh, not resolution, more like the truth is finally clear, like we had both arrived, separately and too late, at the same accurate conclusion. "I understand," I replied. We bid farewell. I remained in my kitchen for a while. Then I stood up, refilled my coffee, and moved towards the window. The creek flowed outside on that November morning, swift and determined, carrying on its own business. Nathan arrived as scheduled on Friday, and I picked him up from Diane's house. He placed his bag in the back and got comfortable, prompting me to move from the curb. As we drove along Lancaster Avenue, he mentioned, "Mom told me she spoke with you." Indeed, she did. How was it? Surprisingly better than anticipated, I replied, considering our conversation. Pondering, he inquired, "Good strange or bad strange?" Contemplating, I answered, "Simply genuine." Simply authentic, he seemed to understand, as for him, who had been observing his parents for 13 years, such a statement might resonate. We picked up sandwiches from the deli and consumed them at your kitchen table. He informed me that his grandfather's health was improving. Doctors had moved him out of the ICU in the afternoon. He told me that his grandfather had made a joke about one of the nurses within 6 hours of admission, which the family deemed a positive sign. I genuinely laughed for the first time that day. Later, while washing up, Nathan asked, "Dad, can I ask you something? Always." 11 months ago, when Mom drove off at the gas station, had you already decided not to return, or did it become clear while standing there? This was the question that had been on my mind for over 10 months. The answer wasn't as simple as yes or no. "I believe I had been leaning towards that decision for quite some time," I replied thoughtfully. "The gas station simply made it impossible to maintain the facade any longer. You understand, when constructing something, and there's a critical crack in a structural beam, the crack doesn't occur at the exact moment the structure falls apart. Instead, the crack exists long beforehand. The collapse is just the moment it becomes apparent." Nathan contemplated this, for he often understood engineering analogies as I did, something from me that moved into him effortlessly, much like things do. "I believe," he whispered, "that there was a crack, too, a crack I had been aware of." We remained silent in the kitchen for a spell, his uncertainty hanging in the air. "Are you all right?" I inquired. "Indeed," he replied. "I believe so. Having two homes feels peculiar, yet not as perplexing as I had anticipated. Furthermore, it appears to me that you are." He paused thoughtfully. "Established. You seem more like your usual self, but even more so, established, yourself, but more defined." Recall the situation 11 months ago, when we were both huddled in a gas station parking lot on Route 30, as the November cold bit and tail lights vanished around a bend. Now I realized that the fearsome thing, the thing you had braced yourself against, that you assumed would eventually find equilibrium, is not only endurable but also manageable. It's something you can steer through, despite its pain, disorientation, unfamiliar motel rooms, uncomfortable bedding, and lonely mornings on unknown riverbanks. Across the journey, a reflection of you exists, recalling the sensation of truly filling the void you inhabit. I acknowledge that the type of resilience I nurtured throughout most of my adulthood, the silent perseverance, the peacekeeping, the avoiding scenes, has its bounds. Beyond those bounds, it transforms from resilience into something else. Something that appears as stability, but is actually just tolerance. Tolerance for whatever is urging you to continue enduring, to continue accommodating. I acknowledge that my son is extraordinary and that I didn't bestow all of his excellence upon him. Some of it was simply who he was born to be, but some of it came from me. Some of it is the result of 12 years watching his father tackle matters with gravity and treat people respectfully, always appearing no matter the challenges. I am entitled to feel proud of that, even when the relationship that provided the backdrop for it didn't last. I acknowledge that Diane is not a monster. I wish to state this clearly. The woman who departed from the gas station with laughter was constructed from her personal past, her own scars, and ancestral behaviors she hadn't vocally expressed until then. Eventually, she discovered those words in a dimly lit hospital waiting room. People can transform. I can't foresee if her change will endure for her, nor am I responsible for overseeing it anymore. But I don't wish ill upon her. In truth, I hope her father continues to tell his 30-year-old jokes for another 3 decades. I aspire for her to construct something more robust. The only fact I know is that I no longer wait. Now I reside in Ardmore in an apartment that belongs to me entirely. My mornings are mine. The creek trail is mine. The coffee and my Thursday conversations with Douglas, my weekly Zoom meeting with Dr. Ware. The sound of Friday evenings when Nathan enters and sets his bag down. A distinct noise of a teenager arriving home where he belongs. All of it is mine. In October, I advanced to the senior partnership track without hesitation. The Harrisburg project concluded below budget and ahead of schedule. Now, I have 3 fresh clients. By any objective standard, my work performance has significantly improved compared to a year ago, and I understand the reason. Once you stop investing the majority of your energy in situations beyond control, an ample amount of energy is left for everything else. This morning, while savoring high-quality coffee at my kitchen table, I reflected on the seemingly insignificant event that occurred on a November Tuesday, standing in a Flying J parking lot with a $4.79 receipt for coffee and witnessing a car round a bend. The incident seemed so minor then, Route 30, a gas station, 6 minutes. However, its impact proved to be immense. My phone buzzed. It was Nathan calling before school. "How's Grandpa?" I asked. "He'll be discharged tomorrow," Nathan replied. My mom mentioned he's testing the nurse's patience. One allegedly called him her most challenging patient, to which he replied that it was due to his high expectations. I chuckled. It was genuine. "Nathan reported that he asked about you," he said. "He asked my mom to convey this message." There was a pause. I could sense him reading from something written. "He wanted me to tell you he's always admired you, and that Diane made a mistake, and he regrets not expressing that sooner." I remained motionless at my kitchen table. "Inform him I said thank you," I replied. "Tell him I reciprocated his sentiment." After the call, I stayed seated at the table for some time, merely listening to the November sounds of the apartment, the heater switching on, a car on Lancaster Avenue, and the neighbor's dog conducting its morning survey of the world outside. Then I donned my coat, tied my shoes, and embarked on my walk. The stream was flowing. This morning was clear and swift, bearing the crisp chill of November. The light filtered through the trees in a slanting autumnal manner. It wasn't warm, but it was palpable. For some time I remained at the riverbank, observing it. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are concealed within catastrophes. It seems that relinquishing what you thought you couldn't survive without is often the sole means to uncover your true essentials. Frequently, the force that cracks you open is also the one that lets in fresh air. My father once said, "The strongest constructions aren't those untouched by strain. They are those designed to bend and rebound, to carry the burden and redistribute it without total collapse." I had always associated this with tangible structures like buildings or bridges. Now I am interpreting it differently. I stood by the creek until my fingers turned numb. After spinning around, I strolled back among the trees towards Lancaster Avenue, heading for the apartment, my workplace, and the tasks that awaited me. I was also walking towards the son I conversed with tonight, and the life I've been crafting, truthfully and steadily, a day at a time. It's my hands, my work, my life. And for the first time in an extendable period, it's perfectly sufficient. My name is Curtis Aldridge. I'm 46 years old. I was abandoned at a gas station on Route 30 outside Chambersburg, Pennsylvania on a Tuesday night in November. As a jest, I never returned. Nearly a year later, my wife found me, or to put it more accurately, she discovered herself, which is the significant aspect of the narrative. Also, I had 20 missed calls this morning, and by the day's end, I grasped a truth that escaped me at the outset. Often, those who inflict pain are the most disoriented of all. At times, the kindest action might be to cease feigning that remaining is equivalent to laboring. This advice applies to you, your family, and the entire troubled predicament. If this message resonates with you, be it about prolonging a stay when it was time to leave, about the price of enduring in silence for years, or about the possibilities that lie beyond setting boundaries, please like and share this video immediately. Comment on a moment when you reached your limit. What action did you take? What lesson did you learn? I read each comment carefully, so do not hesitate to share. Subscribe to this channel to receive weekly stories about real individuals dealing with unforeseen challenges hidden within ordinary lives, about the moments unprepared for, and the new self that awaits after the toughest decision ever made. In due course, remember this: truth may carry a price, but falsehood carries a heavier one. Allow me to share with you an insight into living in a one-bedroom apartment in a compact Pennsylvania college town when you're 46, having left behind your marriage, city, and daily life. It's nothing like the silver screen presence. No profound montages are crafted for your mornings. The flat above Gerald Booth's hardware store on Center Street echoes an unusual sound on cold nights. akin to a creak or a moan, as if the structure was conforming more intimately to the November chill. On the third weekend, I tackled the persistent drip from the kitchen faucet due to my inability to rest, and the fact that as a structural engineer, it was a problem I could practically address, an essential accomplishment amidst a prolonged period where my unresolved issues far outnumbered the solved ones. The initial 3 weeks were undeniably peculiar. My work on the Harrisburg project, being in a critical phase demanding my full focus for 6 to 8 hours daily, offered stability. Yet the hours beyond work presented challenges as I navigated filling them. Over time, I had forgotten how to live without an ongoing list of responsibilities. The house was constantly requiring attention, Diane had matters to discuss, and Nathan required driving, help, or listening. There was always another task waiting. In November, within Bloomsburg's one-bedroom apartment, silence often reigned, broken by the settling of the ceiling, a faulty faucet drip, and the occasional distant hum of cars on Center Street. I was at a loss as to how to cope with this solitude. My television screen became my most frequent companion during those initial 3 weeks, far more than it had been in the preceding 3 years. This wasn't due to an innate desire to watch TV, but rather the comfort of having voices and a moving world within reach, devoid of any expectations from me. I found solace in a documentary series about infrastructure engineering, which touched on my professional domain yet felt as nourishing as favorite comfort food. I also revisited old baseball games through a streaming service I'd almost forgotten I was still subscribed to. Lastly, I immersed myself in 2 seasons of a Scottish detective show, finding its perpetually damp and gray environment soothing, despite the protagonist's consistent dissatisfaction with his circumstances and unrelenting problem-solving abilities. In that detective, I perceived an attribute. From the 3rd week onwards, I began to enjoy peaceful slumber. This observation took me by genuine astonishment. For years, my sleep had been far from restful, not severely or clinically, but more like a person who is constantly vigilant for impending troubles due to some part of them being perpetually on guard. However, in Bloomsburg, in the apartment above the hardware store, I started sleeping soundly throughout the night. This wasn't because I found tranquility exactly, as there was still cause for concern. The ceiling groaned, the faucet dripped, and I was still there. It was only after I mended the dripping faucet that my sleep improved even more. What I want to share is the first time I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time, almost failing to recognize it. It was a Friday in December, the last Friday before Christmas. The following day, the bus would bring Nathan for the weekend, and I meticulously arranged our apartment to be a welcoming space for him instead of a temporary shelter for his father. I stocked quality food, decluttered surfaces, and ensured baseball streaming services were accessible. By 6, I had finished, but he wasn't here yet. I settled on the couch, surveying the apartment unquestionably mine, and felt an unfamiliar emotion, neither happiness nor tranquility. It was something more delicate than either, like I am present. This is mine. In just 6 weeks, I crafted this from a gas station parking lot and a motel with a subpar comforter. This is what I constructed. 40 seconds elapsed before my mind drifted to Nathan on the bus, prompting me to phone him for his estimated arrival time. Yet those 40 seconds felt tangible, significant. The initial month's hardest ordeal was the holiday season, and I can't feign otherwise. Christmas carries a distinctive heft. Its unique gravitational pull stems from being a day intended to evoke memories of possessions desired and people expected. On Christmas Eve, I was with Nathan, while on Christmas Day, Diane's family graced my presence. This was a short-term setup. On Christmas Eve, we spent the evening watching movies, consuming Chinese cuisine from a Main Street eatery that remained open, and it genuinely brought us joy. We laughed heartily. He recounted school tales. I presented him with gifts he had requested, carefully selected, and in return he offered me a card penned by his own hand, expressing in the distinctive scrawl of a 13-year-old boy striving for neatness. "Dad, this year was odd, but you handled it well. I'm proud of you." Spent Christmas alone as planned, which was peaceful. I've become accustomed to solitude over time. Called my sister Lorraine in Pittsburgh and Douglas, who shared a humorous tale about a pet and turkey mishap at his house, making me laugh until my chest ached. Watched a game and prepared a satisfying meal for one, growing more adept at this during the past weeks. Consumed it at my kitchen table while gazing at Nathan's card. Received a call from my father around 7. We chatted for nearly an hour. At 70 years old, he resides in the same house in Allentown he's lived in for 4 decades, unyielding and consistent, the same man he's always been. He didn't dispense advice or comment on my situation. Instead, he asked about my eating habits, sleep patterns, and activity levels. He shared details about his neighbor's huge yet placid dog that apparently feared squirrels, finding it unfair. He inquired about Nathan, and I spoke of the card, causing him a moment of silence before he said, "That boy is remarkable." Later, he stated, "He truly is Dad." I didn't challenge his remark, though I might have evaded it a year prior. Instead, I simply replied, "I understand, and I'm making an effort to live up to it." My father responded with a noise that resembled agreement over the phone. "You always have," he said. "You just got lost for a while regarding what that entailed." Unforeseen in January was the emergence of gratitude. Not for the divorce, not for the circumstances, but for the clarity, for the raw honesty of a life pared down to its fundamental elements. I possessed work at which I excelled. I had a son whom I adored. Living in a compact flat with a nearby river path and a favorite coffee shop, Gerald, my landlord, occasionally dropped by on Saturdays, posing queries about the property that were partially sincere and partially a pretext for chatting, which I found endearing without expressing it. It was more than enough. That's quite a significant change for such brief words. Over the greater part of my adult years, I had been steadily acquiring, not extravagantly, not like those who predominantly gather possessions do, but persistently. The dwelling, the banked funds, the professional progression, the standing in my profession, the partnership, the joint life that appeared, from a specific perspective, as everything it was meant to appear. And amidst this steady accumulation, I had seemingly misplaced the item my father had been trying to bestow upon me when I was 19, and didn't fully grasp its value then. Experiencing what truly matters, work tailored to one's unique abilities, cherished individuals aware of their importance in your life, mornings claimed as personal territory, the unique symphony of a Window Creek and self-brewed coffee, and tranquility derived from an absence of performance. In January, for the first time in years, I encountered this balance. I shared this revelation with Dr. Ware following one of those peaceful January mornings, expressing a change in my perspective. "Explain it," he prompted. "I feel as if I'm living my own life, not merely someone else's interpretation of it," I replied. He fell silent for a brief moment. "When was the last time you felt this way?" he queried. Pondering the question, I traveled through years, perhaps before Diane or even prior to that. I delved deeper. Maybe my final year in college, during my thesis work when it was just me, the challenge, and my ability to conquer it, that sensation returned. "What caused that feeling to vanish?" Dr. Ware inquired. "I believe I exchanged it over time for items that seemed like safety," I admitted. "What are your thoughts on that?" I responded. "I believe security and acceptance are genuine necessities," I stated. "I believe I sought them in manners that cost me more than I comprehended. I believe I'm attempting to discover a distinct approach to fulfill them." He acknowledged this with a nod, a sound familiar after learning to discern a therapist's nod. "That seems accurate," he said. I wish to share an incident from July, between the third and fourth mediation sessions, when I returned to Bloomsburg. Although I had the apartment till August, I sat on the Susquehanna riverbank at 10 o'clock in the night. I drove up because I needed to reflect in a place that felt like mine, and the Bloomsburg apartment still felt more like mine than the Philadelphia area hotel I'd been residing in during the mediation process. Gerald had extended my lease on a month-to-month basis. He likely comprehended, in a manner typical of a taciturn individual who avoids superfluous inquiries, that I required a stabilizing point. I settled on the riverbank with my feet nestled in the grass, as the water flowed mysteriously in the night, shimmering silver-gray under the moonlight. My thoughts meandered to numerous aspects. I pondered the 18 years, the dinner gathering where we first met, the Vermont proposal, the initial phases when I believed we were constructing a relationship that would endure. The insidious and almost unnoticeable transformation into something less than what I once was. Bit by bit, soaking up each understated remark. The gas station. I contemplated Nathan. What I wished to demonstrate for him as this journey neared its conclusion. What I desired him to retain from observing his father maneuver through the most challenging year of his life. I didn't want him to learn. When circumstances are difficult, you depart. That wasn't the message. Instead, I wanted him to learn. When a situation proves to be irreparable despite all reasonable attempts, One doesn't continue out of convenience rather than confronting the change. Silence shouldn't mask conflict. It's important for him to understand that standing firm on principles is not the same as retreating. His words in April resonated during a session I often revisited. We were discussing whether my decisions were correct, if I had given the relationship enough chance, and if there was anything I could have done otherwise. He pointed out, "You seem to question if you did enough. What I don't hear is you asking if you asked for enough, if you clearly communicated what you required." This struck a chord with me because he was right. I had taken on too much and hadn't expressed my needs as clearly as I should have. In my mind, a healthy marriage necessitates self-sacrifice, patience, and prioritizing the other person, all of which is valid but within limits. However, I never directly told Diane that certain behaviors were unacceptable or demanded change. I assumed she'd pick up on it, presuming my patience was obvious. I believed my staying spoke volumes. But on that July riverbank, I realized something new. The divorce wasn't solely about Diane's actions. It all stemmed from my failure to voice my needs, to assert myself and demand honesty, not just from her but from myself, in a timely manner. By the time I became honest, we had progressed too far down the path, leaving only the option of the divorce as an escape route. This knowledge doesn't assign equal blame. Diane made her decisions, and I made mine. The scenario involving the injured party and wrongdoer becomes intricate, and I believe this complexity is significant. The lesson that truly matters isn't beware of challenging women who leave gas stations. The lesson is recognize your limits before you overstep them. A particular moment in my fall always resurfaces. It was an October afternoon, my inaugural week in the Ardmore apartment. I had just returned from picking up Nathan for our initial 50-50 custody weekend. Not a transitory agreement anymore. The genuine article, the fresh mold of our family life. He'd stowed his bag in the second bedroom, which I had arranged with great consideration as a man eager for his son to recognize it was his territory as well, not merely a visiting spot. A desk for schoolwork, storage for items he wished to keep here. His personal key on a keychain I'd custom-made for him. He stood in the doorway of that room for a second, examining it. He looked at me and remarked straightforwardly, "This is excellent, Father. Not this is pleasant, or thanks, or any of the evasive things a 13-year-old might use to avoid direct emotion. This is good," present tense, commenting on quality and truth. I replied, "Yes, I agree too." And then he went in, dropped his bag, and began exploring the shelves as if it was his own place because it was, and I headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. The entire apartment resonated with Nathan's presence, and it was the most complete feeling I've had since November. The last point I want to make is this. Sometimes people ask me, my brother, sister, colleagues who have heard parts of this story over the past year, if I regret it, if I wish I'd managed things differently, if knowing what I know now, I would have acted sooner, been clearer, drawn a line before we reached a gas station on Route 30 in November. Affirmatively, but simultaneously negatively. Affirmative, as recognizing the self-awareness cultivated in the past 11 months is something I wish I had known a decade ago. I would have appreciated understanding my father's words at 19 and locating Dr. Ware's office earlier than at 46. I would have liked Nathan to have experienced the version of his father I'm evolving into now, instead of the one struggling to maintain something falling apart. However, negative because I am unsure if my former self was ready for this understanding. I question whether the me at 35 or 40 would have been receptive. The previous versions of myself had not yet experienced heartbreaking moments like watching something vital depart with laughter, nor spent solitary nights in motels writing truths as a means to confront them, nor endured the process of discovering one's true nature when stripped down to the basics. Lessons can sometimes be grasped only through difficult experiences, not because the universe intends to cause pain, but because certain truths can only be perceived from within them. Though one may be informed about a structure's stress fracture, or even presented with engineering data, there is a unique comprehension that arises when witnessing its ultimate collapse and finding oneself amidst the debris, still clutching the blueprints, thinking, "Now I see it. Now I see where it all went wrong. Now I see it now. I am 46 years old. I am a structural engineer in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. I have a remarkable son who visits me every other week and appears to be thriving by any standard I know of. My career is experiencing renewed growth for the first time in years. I trust my therapist and frequent a coffee shop and enjoy walking along a nearby trail. I was abandoned at a gas station on Route 30 in November. The most profound event in my life wasn't because the suffering wasn't genuine. It was and still is. A portion of it will always linger, yet it was significant due to a revelation in that parking lot. I ceased feigning, and whatever bloomed from that void of deceit, this subdued, lucid, truthful life is worth every difficult month it took to discover it. My name is Curtis Aldridge. Eventually, I returned home. It merely turned out that home was a place I needed to construct myself. It wasn't anger that prompted my departure. Instead, I found the tranquility necessary to listen to my own thoughts. And I suspect many of us are so engrossed in absorbing, adapting, and maintaining harmony that we rarely pause to ponder, is this acceptable? Is this the life I desire? Sometimes a moment at the gas station occurs to you. Sometimes you must manufacture it yourself. In either case, the question worth contemplating tonight is, what have you been silently enduring without naming it yet? Share your thoughts in the comments. I've gone through each of them, and if it resonates with your experiences, consider subscribing, as we post authentic accounts and insights weekly without any unnecessary filler. Expect you next time.